Hi, good evening, and welcome to the webinar tonight. I'm Jill Summerlot, the webinar coordinator with InSource. I wanted to give you a minute here. I'm going to pull up our QR code for our meeting today. And if you would please direct your attention to the screen, and it is going to bring this code up for you. If you would please, again, direct your camera to the screen, and if you would also um, click on that QR code, and that is going to take you to a training sign-in. That is also going to give you information that you're going to need during the meeting, those resources that we use, presentation. Um, it also will give you an evaluation, and it will even give you a certificate at the end of our webinar today. Again, please use that QR code and sign in and get those resources for today. Let me just take care of a few housekeeping rules here. Rules, I shouldn't really say rules. I just need to get some things situated. So that I can make sure I have all of all my pages where they need to be. This is a webinar entitled The Foster Child with Special Needs. We are live out on Facebook Live, so let me check to make sure that everything went um, well with it, and let me make sure that I can see us out there so that if there's anyone that has questions for this evening, please feel free to post those either in the chat box on Facebook, or for those of you that are here with me on our Zoom platform, please feel free to either put those in the chat box questions, or you can put those in the question answer box. I also have put in, while you're waiting and you're doing that QR code, I'm going to post some resources for you that I do for pretty much every single webinar. It's a way for you to be able to email us. You'll be able to look at some of our trainings. You'll be able to also access just some basic information, our website, things like that. And I also will have the URL, that tiny URL is copied in here as well, just in case for some reason you're having difficulty with accessing your the QR code. So let me just take a second here um, and then we will get started. Okay, I think we're good to go. Thank you very much again for being here with me tonight, and thank you for being patient with me as I got everything wrapped and ready to go. And go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Jill Summerlot. I'm the webinar coordinator with InSource. Tonight, we're going to talk about that the foster child with special needs. And so let's go ahead and get it started. I would like to start off with, this is our legal disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. I don't give legal advice. That's, if you need legal advice, please reach out to a competent special education attorney and ask for any of those legal questions that you may have. InSource is a grant-funded and parent organization, and it is part of a national network. I would highly encourage you to, again, log on to our insource.org website and peruse it, and just kind of look some of the information that is on there. We have some great resources that that you will be able to navigate to. Also, you I'd like to tell you, maybe if you know or maybe you don't know, most of the in-source employees, we are parents of children with disabilities, or we have family members that have a disability. We are All of our services are done at no charge. They're free to parents, and we do take contributions. They are always welcome, and those contributions help us to cover those expenses that aren't allowed through our in-source grant. In-source was established in 1975, and we are the first of 5 parent centers for the United States. We still hold that grant, and we will be celebrating 50 years next year. So very proud to be able to say for 50 years, this is what our organization has been doing. It was, in-source was started by a group of parents who wanted to better understand IDEA and what that meant for their children. And so they were the grassroots movement for establishing in-source. And they also were part of that organization on being able to help their children go to their own public schools and where they were able to go. We are funded through the state, the Indiana Department of Education, and the United States Department of Education through their federal education grants. And again, we were one of the first 5 parent training information centers established in the United States. So how do we help? We do several different things by helping. We support families statewide. We have regional staff that is out throughout the state of Indiana. This really does help us so that we can better understand our community. We understand and live in that community, so that's where we service our families. And again, there's a link in the box, the question and answer, or I'm sorry, the chat box for any way that you can get to the staff on the website. I'm a little tongue-tied tonight for some reason. I don't know. Just bear with me, and we'll get through this tonight. So we do have a number of online learning opportunities. We have our website has our training calendar on there. You're more than welcome to peruse it and to see if there's anything else that you would like to maybe, whether it be an in-person webinar, or I'm sorry, an in-person training, whether it be a webinar. All of those things are on our insource.org website. There is, we assist families again across the whole state of Indiana, and we do that to help them to better understand your rights and responsibilities as a parent. And we do want to make sure that we are helping parents to become better advocates for their children. So numbers in foster care, it's really, this is kind of staggering. The data has been provided by the Youth Institute, and if you haven't had a chance to go on and look at anything from the Youth Institute in Indiana Youth Institute, please feel free to jump over there and look at that. It's really kind of, again, it's kind of staggering onto those things. You see here that this is where, from the Indiana Department of Children's Services, you'll find all of these resources right here underneath. Just want to make sure that it all came up on screen for everybody. But this is where you will find those resources in getting that information for that, for your information for your foster children. So we know, again, those numbers are staggering in the state of Indiana. The national average is 6 per 1,000 students. And so in Indiana, that's 10 per 1,000 students. So you're talking about a very large population. We know that the recent decline in numbers in Indiana, and oops, I'm sorry, There has been a recent decline in numbers in Indiana. It went from 2018, it went from 34,000 down to in 2020, 26,900. And a lot of that can be contributed to COVID and what we went through. So there was some probably some data that is maybe missing a little bit because of COVID. It really just kind of depends. Again, that Youth Institute, Indiana Youth Institute, does have a lot of that. And it does come from the Kids Count data book from the Indiana Youth Institute. It does give you the information on how poverty and trauma can have a huge impact on the academic results of students. Also that book explains how students lack that security and that safety, along with that stability, and that does come along with being combined with that trauma of foster care. And there are some disadvantages and some vulnerabilities that do impact that. So comparing foster youth, lower scores are on those standardized assessments, more than 3 times more likely to be retained are foster children, and nearly 4 times more likely to be suspended and or expelled. These are the numbers, staggering numbers that we're comparing here. And so we want to be mindful that, our, excuse me, our children that are in foster care, they are at a disadvantage. And there are several reasons why and how this comes about. There are some racial disparities. You have the 18% of foster children are Black, even though 11% are of the general population. And again, these numbers are from 2018. 72% are white, even though the general population in Indiana is 75%. So there is, there's a hypothesis that there is awareness of some communities may be inequitable and screening process for students may be biased. So, we really need to be looking at making sure that our children are, for one, properly identified. And for number two, if you are in that foster care system of being a foster parent, I hope that this webinar tonight will be able to help you and guide you through some information that you're going to eventually probably need. Disabilities for foster youth. Children with special needs, they are disproportionately represented in the foster care system, and studies do suggest that at least 1/3 to half of our foster children are special needs, which would, entail they may need an IEP, that individualized educational plan. The lack of the school success, there's several studies that show that children in foster care and special ed, and how that does affect their school success. Success in school is critical for every single student to achieve that really good, solid, positive outcome as an adult. And the Foster Future Projects identified 7 key findings that underscored the fact that lack of school success is definitely a significant issue for foster children with special needs. So educationally, policy changes for foster youth. As you see on the screen, there were changes in 2008, 2013, and 2015. You had that Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act that was prioritized through school stability. And then we had the Uninterpreted Scholars Act that was amended through the FERPA law to allow our children welfare professionals access to those educational records without a parent consent. Because as you know, part of the process through that IEP prioritized, and that educational needs of those students in foster care. And there have been several recent changes in that educational policies that do promote school success. for youth in that foster care. You know, the latest one is the Every Student Succeeds Act, that ESSA, that does promote school stability, that success, that good collaboration between schools and those agencies that have to be a part of that foster child. So there are several things that do go along with that. And so more of those new laws, there's the family federal, I'm so sorry, the federal family first wow, maybe I should just stop and go start over. Prevention Services Act, and that's going to provide that funding for that mental health services and supports, which that mental health component is so important for that, because if you remember earlier on in just a few uh, slides earlier, you heard me mention the fact that we're talking about children that do have trauma, and so we are looking at maybe some of that trauma being part of that mental health that they're going to need help with. We do have the governor's audit of the DCS that led to the law to provide more support for that in-home placement, and that was done in 2019. So when they do become adults, we looked up some of the cases and effects of children with special needs. So we're going to focus on more on outcomes and problems for foster children with special needs in school. But you see on the screen that each year approximately those 20,000 young adults age out of that foster care, and they have little or no help from a family. The community has given them few connections, and they have very little financial support. So, the question is, are we ignoring foster youth with disabilities? And there has been done several researches and studies that will help us to understand that just a little bit better. And so the Fostering Future study identified 6 key factors in fostering future studies behind the lack of educational success for the foster children. And that number one was special education needs are often overlooked. So safety is the first priority for case managers, not necessarily education. And information is sometimes not exchanged quickly between the DCS and the school systems. So we want to make sure again that we do have that smooth transition, that we do have all of those, all those dotted I's and crossed T's, and to make sure that we are doing things in a timely, fashionable manner. Because again, we're talking about our foster children, and we're trying to make sure that they don't have that they're not successful in school. The second one is that foster children are less likely to receive services. And that's because children with behavioral and emotional and learning needs, they do are more likely to have those multiple placements. And that instability in that child's life can cause a child to fall further behind academically. And educational performances they're impacted hugely by multiple placements. You think about your own self and about if you would be moved around and had some, whether it be mental health issues, whether it be some sort of a disability in just itself alone, and then having that trauma from being in the foster system, you can see where those services, those children are less likely to receive services because of being moved around, and all of that does impact that education dramatically. Then we have the social isolation, and that's number 3. So a child can have, when they've had those multiple placements, it's very hard for them to form those friendships. And, you see that they just get, to know somebody on one end, and then another time later, they have to be moved to someplace else. So that system can cause a foster child to feel like they don't fit in. Even just think about if you were a child and whenever maybe you had to move with your family. And I've heard a lot of that with even military families because they've had to move, different times, different places because of their parent, parent and where they were going to be stationed. So even situations with that biological families and foster families, they may not even feel supportive. So we need to make sure that that social isolation is definitely taken care of, and that we are making sure that, again, we are having the foster children that are in your care are connected with all of those services that they need, and that you have access to all of those educational records that you are going to be needing as well. And number 4 is a lack of education. And the parent is defined in Article 7 as and for responsible for educational decisions, and that is the Indiana Code is 732-70, and that is the definition of a parent. And foster parents sometimes are unaware of their responsibilities, or they're not even aware of the special education law, which may make them unable to advocate for children in their care. So we want to make sure that they do understand that the parent definition in Article 7 does include a foster parent. So whenever you're talking about a parent, that can be that foster parent, because just kind of real quickly, a parent can be that biological parent. It can be a foster parent. It can be a child that is as a child that's turned 18. They become their own parent if they've not had someone that has been they've not had somebody that's taken over for their education or for their finances. So they've been, I think we're just leaving on my head. Anyway, so there are several different types of a parent, but foster parent in or out of Article 7 does speak to a foster parent being a parent. So that would give them the same access, same rights as let's say, a traditional parent, or the child that's turned 18. All of those words that are parent, that they all have the access to the same things across the board. So number 5 is that lack of coordination between schools and the Department of Department of Children's Services. And so we want to make sure that there are very, very good transition plans that are being taken care of whenever you're talking about either whenever a child's first coming in, going out, wherever they're going, to try and make sure that all of those efforts are coordinated to ensure that there is not a duplication of services, or there is not conflicting outcomes. No, there's not conflicting services, or there is not a lack of services. That Foster Care Independent Act provides resources to help those youth that are going to transition into adulthood. And the number 6, professionals lack knowledge about unique needs of foster children, and educating teachers and case managers on how this trauma impacts their health, their behavior, their life, just the graduation rate and academic achievement, all of that is really, really crucial. And we should really all come to know about those common interests, those common instruments and strategies that we can use, like the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and the TIC, the trauma-informed care. So we, as a part of those professionals and as part of that case manager, part of those schools, we all can come around and encompass that child, and to make sure that we are making sure that they are not lacking in any of the services that they are going to be needing. So what is special education? So special education is individualized for each and every child, for each and every student. One child may need minimal services or interventions, and while there may be another child that needs more specialized, we'll say, more specialized services in receiving special education services. Special education services are provided by the school, and that is at no cost to a parent. We want to make sure that there is, an understanding that there is no cost to that parent, whether it be a foster parent or a parent. And that doesn't include, book rental and things like that, because book rental is something that every single parent across the board does have to pay for. The parents do, again, they have to pay for those fees. Any of those fees that are allowed, again, just like book rental, and as we get to further on down the line with technology, If there's technology fees, then as a parent, you would be responsible for those as well. Again, who is the parent? So a parent can be a biological or adoptive parent whose rights have not been restricted by a court. It could be a guardian, including a court-appointed guardian or a temporary guardian, a foster parent, a person with legal custody, and that could be a grandparent, that could be a relative, or an adult who does accept the responsibility for that student, and with whom that student does live. Those are different types of parents, and so we know that that would be covered under who is the parent. And as you see on the screen, there is several different areas of being a parent. An educational surrogate parent, you might hear the acronym ESP. This is an adult who is trained to understand that special education process. It is a volunteer, and this person does represent educational needs of a student. It could be a student has CHINs, they're a CHIN status, or even maybe could be award of the state. That's why they would have a educational surrogate. So again, any student at the age of 18 that doesn't have a court-appointed guardian. Now, I just want to kind of point out that a parent involvement is one of those 6 basic principles of IDEA, and parent involvement is highly recommended. It's highly encouraged. So those educational surrogates, decisions about the student's education must be made by a responsible adult. Parent participation is that protection. And so we know that there could be an educational surrogate could be appointed to that child. And that's part of the educational rights. And each one of those children do have a right to have their educational rights protected. An educational surrogate, IDEA in Article 7 surrogate parent provision is a way to protect that child's rights for special education process. And when this generally occurs when the natural biological parent can't participate in those educational decision-making times. This listing is an example on the screen of some of the responsibilities of this person, and you can become more aware of this specific duties and opportunities as we're going to go through the training. And an educational surrogate parent has, again, the same rights and responsibilities as a parent. Standards for that surrogate, because educational surrogate parent is a special education, can in-source act as a parent if a foster is unaware of what to do. No, they cannot. Let me point out to you real quick, and thank you very much for your question, Jessica. At in-source, we're a pivot to the process. We are here to help the foster parent become more education or more aware of the process for helping that child to get to the services they need. So we at InSource, our staff is not able to be a surrogate. They're not able to answer those questions or take on that responsibility for that. They are not a foster parent because there are steps that a foster parent has to do in order to become a foster parent. And InSource, we are not that. Again, we are just that part of the process for helping parents to navigate through the special education process. Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you very much. And I don't have any questions up on my Zoom chat, so periodically I'll be looking back and forth. So and hopefully you don't think I'm not paying attention, but I really, really am. So some of the standards for those surrogates, because surrogate parent is a special education designation. This is part of Article 7, and each special education director is responsible for making sure that the eligible students that are identified, that they do have a surrogate parent assigned to represent that student's educational needs. So if you're not familiar with your special education director in your area, or you need information on that, you can access that through your school, your public school system. If you're not familiar with anybody at that school system, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to the elementary, middle school, or high school, whichever part of the school system you will be going into, and ask them for that information. And then if you can't get any information from there, you are always more than welcome to call the liaison that is in your area. And again, that information, you can reach your staff directory on our website at insource.org. And you'll just be able to put in your zip code, and it will help you to find out who that would be. It will tell you what area that liaison is in, and then that liaison would be able to help direct you to where that special education director and that information would be. So anybody that is assigned as a surrogate parent, they do receive a letter of assignment from the office of that special education director. So it's not just something that is, completely out of the blue. There is some very special requirements that the special education director does have to make sure that is followed. And one of them is to be 18. They do have to have training about that special education process. They have to understand the rights and responsibilities that they're going to be asked to assume. And so they do also have to have the understanding that there is no potential for conflict of interest regarding this child's needs, and they cannot be a employee of a public agency or any agency involved in the care of that student. So you can't be anybody that would be considered a conflict of interest. So there are some guidelines that have to be followed by that. And the adults listed here may serve as those educational surrogate parents, the volunteers, community volunteers, or even your CASA court-appointed special advocates. Now, I do want to just kind of real quickly back up the train here, because you see on the screen that it does say in-source volunteers. Well, that is a difference between, we have volunteers that volunteer for our organization. Now, they could absolutely be a surrogate parent, but as far as being an employee of in-source, we cannot. That is not what we would take on that role as being. So schools, again, that schools will do a background check on anyone they are considering to assign to that duty. The parent of other students who receive special services, they could even serve. And the educational surrogate parent may be assigned to represent more than one student. You could have 2 or 3 students. And elementary students, they may not be aware that someone is even serving as that educational surrogate parent on their behalf, or understand anything about the protection. Again, it's one of those things that, depending upon the age of the student, the ability to know through that process. So those are just some of the potential surrogates. So a student who needs a surrogate parent. So there's a need for that ESP, you'll hear that acronym, that's limited to certain circumstances. So a child who needs to be evaluated, excuse me, for special education, or who currently has an IEP, may need to have an ESP. If no, excuse me, if there is no parent that is identified. Biological parents cannot represent a student with CHINS status unless a judge expressly reserves those parental authority or children remains in the birth home. So there is some very strict rules and guidelines for that. And when the student has CHINS status, which, by the way, CHINS status is a child in need of services, a judge has restricted usually the rights of the biological parent. And that judge may expressly reserve educational rights for those biological parents, but this should be documented in a court order. So a CHINS child who lives in birth home does not need an ESP. Biological parent has an educational rights in the circumstances. And if you're if you are taking notes, if you would ever want to look that up, that is in Indiana Code 7-39-1. So again, a foster parent is defined as the parent for those educational purposes. And a child that is placed in a foster home as a ward of the court, the foster parent would be identified as the parent again. And we can always go back to that definition of what that parent means. So there would be no need for that educational surrogate parent to be appointed as long as that foster parent has been identified as the parent. And again, we'll review the definition of the parent again. And an educational surrogate parent would need to be appointed again if a ward was placed in a residential facility and they have met any of the criteria above. Those procedural safeguards, navigating the course is a companion guide to Article 7, written explicitly in a language that we can understand. And those procedural safeguards is the formal terms for the rights and responsibilities for the parents and the schools. Now, the procedural safeguards not only protect the child, not only protect the parent, but they also protect the school. And they're designed to promote parental participation in the special education process. And that also means to work out disagreements between the parents and schools, and ultimately to ensure that the student with the disabilities that they are provided with that faith, that free, appropriate public education. I highly encourage you, if you do, or if you are in that situation, and I'm sure we'll get into it further on down into the presentation, but you would be offered a copy of those procedural safeguards at least one time a year. And I highly encourage you to make sure that you do take them and that you do read them, especially towards the back when it gives you some resources. So the chart is an overview of the process, and we know that special education does follow a process. It kind of follows a wheel, if you would. And Article 7 does provide the rules that regulate this process. And so the chart over here does show placement is decided at the last step. And so we have to make sure that, again, we are following those steps. This only comes after a case conference committee has considered the student's needs. So you're going to see where it starts there with the strength of the needs, goals, services, then placement. So, this is the wheel that we're going to be following to make sure that we are giving that child every opportunity, that we are giving them the appropriate goals and services that they may need so that they can reach their goals. And that only then should the decision be made of where the best place might be for the student to receive those services. So we're talking about the very, again, follow that wheel. So we have to talk about strengths and needs, and then we go to the goals, the services, and then placement. So, again, this is just an example of what that would look like. So that initial evaluation, that's a request for an evaluation triggers. Usually the first time the students are required to fully inform parents of their rights and provide written notice of the action of the schools so that they are proposing or refusing to take that child and do those evaluations. So a parent requests for the evaluation. The school staff can even ask for that evaluation. It is best practice for parents to put the request in writing with the date of the parent request. I highly encourage all my parents that I work with to put it into writing, put it into an email, take it to school, have it time stamped, give it to the person that is either a principal. It has to be a licensed personnel. So that could be the principal, it could be a teacher, it could be a counselor. And then the school has 10 instructional days to notify the parent of what those proposed actions are going to be. The evaluation plan is called a notice of initial evaluation, and that would be asking for parent consent to evaluate. Schools cannot start that evaluation process until a parent does sign for that consent. So again, if we're talking about a child that's here in foster care and you're the foster parent, there's a need for you to sign for that evaluation to be done. the educational evaluation. So what is considered under that? We do know that there is a multidisciplinary team that does conduct the evaluation, and this team is a variety of professionals. The members of the teams vary depending on the suspected need of the student, that suspected area of disability. Again, more than one test may be done. It could be used as a variety of evaluation tools that are completely non-discriminatory. The tools must be valid and reliable, so they have to be accurate, measure the area that they're designed to evaluate. The evaluation measures the student's abilities and capabilities, not just the disability. So just please remember that you're going to be discussing about the child's abilities and their capabilities along with that area of disability. Again, the student is assessed in all areas related to that suspected disability. The results do provide relevant information to directly help those at that case conference. Again, let's go back to that wheel. So we're going to have that conversation, and so that we can have that information, be able to determine the needs of that student, and those assessments are tailored to help determine that specific areas of educational needs that child will have. If you have medical information that is relevant to your child's educational needs, the school does appreciate it when you make that available to them. I just want to make note here that a medical diagnosis is not the same as an educational eligibility. The two systems they use two completely different criteria, and you may have already heard that a medical diagnosis is not the same thing as clinical versus educational. So if you just kind of keep those two things in mind and know that they are completely two separate things, that again, just because you may have ADHD or you may have autism, because you had that medical diagnosis does not automatically make you eligible for those IEPs. It is, again, going through that evaluation process. So the eligible child, just again, not having a disability can make them to be eligible for that. As you see on the screen, there are some bolded words, and the first two that you see, or the first three, are and adversely affect. So it has to adversely affect those educational outcomes, and so the school has to also consider those functional performances. So it's just not academic, it's also functional, but it has to have an adverse effect on those academic achievement upon that functional performance, and or both. That's just a real quick how you would become eligible. So a student with a mild to moderate hearing impairment wears hearing aids, learns at the same rate and appropriate for their potential as shown by evaluation results. So they may not need any sort of special education because there's little to no impact on their performance. You will see on the screen 13 areas of eligibility, and there are 3 categories that require evidence of that intellectual disability, and is the all others. All of these other areas, other than the 3, they all do coexist with each other and with all levels of intelligence. And so let's just talk about intellectual disability. It's listed as an example of intellectual defined the faculty of reasoning and understanding objectively, especially with regarding to abstract or academic matters. That is your intellectual disability category. So categories do not define what services a student receives. The developmental delay refers to a child that is between the ages of 3 and 9. And Article 7 If you don't have a copy of Article 7, I highly encourage you to either go on to nsource.org or you go on to the Indiana Department of Education, the special education component to that, and download a copy of Article 7 because it will give you an explanation of each one of these areas of disability. So who decides that eligibility? So the case conference committee's duties is to decide eligibility. So the case conference committee decisions, the meeting is not controlled by it's not a voting rule. It's not, it's not a majority rule. The final say really does come down between the parent and that public agency representative. That there are protections put into place, and that is those procedural safeguards if you do disagree. If the student is found eligible, then the case conference committee is going to develop that IEP and you're going to move forward. If the student is not found eligible, you can either consider whether there needs to be additional information. You might consider whether there needs to be a 504 written, or if there's any other options that might be available to help the student. Now, at that time, a parent can request an independent evaluation, or they can request mediation. They can request mediation in due process, or request due process. And we're going to talk about those a little bit more. So the notice of case conference committee meeting, just making sure we don't have any questions that have been posted as of yet. A case conference committee meeting has to be scheduled and it must be a mutually agreed upon date and time and place. The parents have to be must be given notice of the case conference committee meeting, and they need to make sure that they've been given that early enough so that they have the opportunity to attend or request to be rescheduled. It has to be given in the parent's native language or some other mode of communication. And the notice of that meeting is different from the written notice of a proposed action. When schools must, they have to give it when a proposal is made by a member of the case conference. So the notice of case conference committee meeting is more likely an invitation. In addition to details about when the meeting will take place, the notice must also explain the purpose of the meeting. So is it an annual case review, an ACR? Is it a transition case conference, a revision case conference? Is this an initial case conference? But also has to include the names and title and positions of that public agency representative, as well as everybody else that's going to be there. And it's important that you understand what that PAR is, that public agency representative, because again, if there's any sort of dispute, it comes down between the parent and that public agency representative. That written notice regarding the student's initial case conference meeting, it has that extra requirement. It has to be provided to a parent at least 5 days prior to the case conference, and it must describe and give findings of the evaluation. It also has to include a description of the action that may be proposed by the school and an explanation of why the public agency may propose that action. So again, that is whenever you're talking about that initial case conference, and make sure that if you are the parent that is looking to sign that evaluation, to give permission for that, make sure that they understand that that is a initial and that you are requesting that 5 days prior to that case conference. So what are the responsibilities of the case conference committee? Well, part of the 6 principles of IDEA, that faith, that appropriate, that free appropriate public education, appropriate evaluation, the IEP, that least restrictive environment, parent and student participation, and procedural safeguards. So the majority of those principles come into play for being part of the responsibility of the case conference committee. But notice the key purpose of IDEA and special education, that is to promote improved educational results for a student with a disability. So the case conference committee should be carrying out responsibilities to be focusing on that student's IEP that provides that instruction, those experiences to enable the student to prepare for educational experiences and past school activities. And that does include that formal education and even if appropriate, employment and independent living skills. The IEP, that individual educational program, this is a guide for how those services are going to be delivered in that educational supports. It's going to include that present levels of performance, and that's going to include the academic performance, and that will also include those functional performances. Those are and the functional performances. Those are those routine everyday activities of daily living: brushing your teeth, combing your hair, putting your clothes on. Those are considered to be functional performances. Although schools often focuses only on the academic performance, that functional skills has to be taken into consideration. Goals should be SMART, and that the acronym SMART stands for specific, measurable, action words, realistic, relevant, and to be time limited. So again, an IEP does run for 1 year, and so when we make those goals, we generally look for those to be for 1 year. It will also say how the progress is going to be measured, and it will also talk about that least restrictive environment. And that means that that student with disability can be educated in the general education population with their same age peers as much as possible. And this is, you may have heard the word a lot of inclusion. Well, that's what least restrictive environment is. Special education requires that as students that are approaching age of 18, that they are, you had that conversation that they will be becoming their own adult at the age of 18. We want to make sure that schools do include, that schools often, they don't include those comprehensive notes. So make sure that if you are going through that IEP, make sure that you are looking at those notes to make sure that those important conversations that they are being captured there. Now, I just want to caution you that the school, they will ask you as a parent your concerns, and there is a part of your IEP that where there is parental concerns. So, I would caution you to make sure that if your concerns are only captured in the notes, to make sure that they are also captured in the portion of the IEP for parent concerns. You can IEP also will have provisions that if someone wants to write a letter, a written opinion, that does have to happen within 10 business days after the meeting. Anybody can write a written opinion for that, even a parent can. But I would really, really caution you as a parent that if you're writing that written opinion for services or any sort of concerns, that be addressed before you write that written opinion, and you can write it. It's entirely up to you. I would never want to take away anybody's ability, or that's part of your rights as a parent. But just make sure that those things are captured within the IEP, because there are places for it. So an IEP has to document those decisions of that least restrictive environment, which is that placement. And placement and services do look different for every single child that has an IEP. Students they may only have to go, as you see on the screen, there are several areas here, and it goes from the least restrictive environment down to the most restrictive. And so depending upon that child's IEP and the decisions out of that case conference committee on where they are going to spend their time. Some students are only going to need to use a resource room. Some students are going to need more support. It could be that separate classroom, or it could be clear down to homebound or hospital setting. In schools, they are able to meet a variety of the students' needs. And again, the IEP does give you that flexibility. Now, I will tell you that not every single school corporation has to have all of those options. A student's placement, can be a combination of all of those as well. I just want to point out, though, to you that homebound is the most restrictive in a hospital setting. So those two are the most restrictive that a child can be in. So you're going from the least to the most on that screen. So when you have those conversations, whether it be that you're, for any reason why that you're talking about placement, just keep in mind that those are the most restrictive from the least to the most. So what happens if you don't agree? There are formal ways to resolve your disagreement, and there are informal ways to resolve your disagreement with your schools. You can reconvene that case conference. You can meet with that public agency representative. I think that we know that by doing those informal options, you're going to keep intact that communication. You're going to keep that bridge intact. But you do have a right to ask for mediation. You do have a right to ask for due process, and you have a right to write a complaint. I just think, in my opinion, it's best to solve those things at the lowest level possible. But then you also know that if you can't, then you have the ability to kind of move up the food chain, for the lack of a better term. So there are, ways of resolving those disputes. The complaint process is one of them. The school, there's a couple examples up here of filing that complaint. And if that's the schools don't implement or follow the IEP, or they don't follow the requirements of Article 7. Another way to look at this is if it's a matter of fact. If it's written in the child's IEP, then it would be a matter of fact. So if you read the IEP and you see that if you find instructions on how something should be done in writing, and if you just kind of ask yourself, is the school doing what is written? If the answer is no, you may want to file a complaint. So that would be on, one way. An example of issues which could be on the basis of state complaint could include failure to conduct an evaluation within the required timeline, or failure to implement a service or services written into an IEP. So again, that's the complaint process. And, again, trying to settle it on the lowest level possible is probably going to be better outcomes, but that is just my opinion. We know that there are, once the case conference committee has agreed upon the IEP, it has to be carried out as written. It has to be done within no later than 10 instructional days after a parent has consented to the student's IEP, and that's the student's initial IEP. So that's the very first IEP that's been signed. Again, if you look in your the information under that QR code, it will have an overview of Article 7 and the IEP timeline. There is a handout for that. All IEPs after the first one, they are implemented on the 11th day after the school. If they've not had any, if they've not received any information from a parent, then on the 11th day, the school can go ahead and institute the IEP. Now, if you're going to challenge the IEP and you're going to challenge the IEP, and this is not your initial or your initial case conference, it's not your first IEP, I would encourage you to get back to the case conference committee, talk about what's going on and why you're not in agreement with it. You do have the right to file and request that mediation, and you can try and resolve your dispute there as well. But again, I'm always going to refer back to, if we settle things on the lowest level possible, there's generally better outcomes from there. The parents' responsibilities, you're responsible for participating in all of those meetings, participating and being present, being part of that case conference committee, give written consent as appropriate, monitor the IEP as written, and request an IEP be amended if there's any changes in that student. Again, InSource can be a resource to help you understand about that special education process a little more. You can, again, access our training library. You can access your special education liaison, and they can also help you with that. Just real quick, we're going to just real briefly kind of discuss a home file. And this really is the best way to get through, we're in the summertime now, and, school's out for, I hope, everybody. But go through that home file, kind of go through there, dig out the things that are old, the things that you're not going to need, and get things in order for next year. It depends upon the way that you do, how you do your files and how you are built to be organized. Some are a 3-ring binder, some are, just an envelope. Some people just, stacks of papers, 4-drawer filing cabinets. If you've not heard my story, I used a 4-drawer filing cabinet. So there are several different things that you can do for that. But now is a great time of year to be getting that all kind of cleaned out, get all of those things that you know are going to be things that you're going to be reaching for the whole school year. We'll be in 2024, 2025 school year next year. Get the latest IEP up in front, get any of those important medical documents, right there with it, and just kind of keep things in a chronological order so that you know where things are at. Again, that home file is, you can see up on the screen what some of those things might be. I was a huge component of keeping those samples of homework because it had samples of handwriting, it had samples of the classroom work that he was doing, and then I could compare it down the line. That's just a little bit on the home file. So there are several ways that you can help. And so we've looked at the various issues facing foster children with disabilities. And so we did just a brief overview of that special education process. And so, you can look at what you can do to advocate for these children. The critical needs of the children and youth with disabilities in foster care strongly affect these children's safety, their care, and their well-being, and the opportunity to grow up in a permanent families and lead to a meaningful and productive life. And so, as you see on the screen, there are just a few things that you, as a parent, foster parent, that you could help with. And you can be an advocate, and in order to advocate effectively, you have to develop an understanding of that special education law. And so we have to know what our child's rights are and how to resolve those disagreements with those schools. So if you have a foster child with special needs, you'll need to meet with that special education teacher, get a copy of the IEP, and read it. Read it, please, front to back. Please read it to know what is housed in there. Call InSource if you have any questions. You can watch any of our online trainings. If something doesn't seem right at school, please ask about it. We're going to be doing several things over the summer as far as webinars and trainings and things. So if you've not signed up for our In Touch weekly newsletter, please do, because that will give you access to what's all going on, not only with webinars, but other things that are going around throughout the state. There are some community resources, as you see on the screen. There is Indiana Disability Rights, there's InSource. We do have the ARC of Indiana and Indiana Family to Family. I would encourage you to reach out to any of those organizations so that you can also become a better advocate for the child that you are helping. We do have a volunteer program at InSource. There are up on the screen some of the things that you can do. Volunteers really have the opportunity to be a part of helping families throughout the state. You're more than welcome to contact us at any of the numbers that you see above or at insource.org. We do have a great new chat feature on our website and also on our Facebook page. We do have a chat feature on that as well. If you would please, at this time, I know it's 8:05. I'm sorry that I went 5 minutes over into your time. If you would please make sure that you do use that QR code. If you will please make sure that you are doing the training sign-in. We are, again, a nonprofit organization, and we are ran completely through those grants. And they do expect us to take that information that we do ask for you in that training sign-in. That has to be reported to our grant people that grant us our grants. Um, but if you would please do that, I would greatly appreciate it. And also, please give me do that evaluation, and please let me know how I am doing. Let me know what I could do better. Let if there's a spot in there that says if there's other things that you would like to see, if there's other topics or something like that, please put those in there. There's I believe it's at the bottom that you can put that in there. But I always will look forward to any sort of criticism and critiquing that anyone would like to do. So again, I am so sorry. I don't have any questions on our Facebook Live page. Thank you very much, everyone that's out on Facebook Live, for being here with me tonight. I don't see anything up in our Zoom chat. Thank you again for everyone that's here with me on our Zoom platform. Again, I greatly appreciate you being here tonight. Check with us on Thursday. Oh, that's tomorrow. We will be having two doctors that will be here on Thursday at 1:30, and the doctors will be discussing those um, evaluations. All right. I say evaluations. Anyway, and I'm going to be the one that's going to be hosting it tomorrow. So, but please, they will be Riley doctors, and they will be giving us some great information on all of that. Um, those areas that we really we're almost afraid kind of sometimes to delve into, but it will be great. It will probably be very in depth. They have provided us with their presentation. So again, thank you very much. I've went 7 minutes into your time. I do apologize for that. Everyone, please have a wonderful evening, and I will see you tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.